Hello everyone, I'm Matt Mitrovich, the alternate historian, and welcome to my 100th video. It's amazing to think that something that began as a way to experiment with a new form of media could evolve into my primary way of sharing alternate history with you all. I couldn't have done it without you, dear viewer, and to thank you, I'm going to do something that people have been asking me to do for a long time. On my old blog, Alternate History Weekly Update, I had a short ongoing series called What Happens Next. In this series, I gave a brief summary of what I think would happen in the future to some of my favorite alternate history series, like S.M. Stirling's Nantucket Trilogy, Harry Harrison's The Hammer and the Cross Trilogy, and Harry Turtledove's World War and Colonization series. From the beginning, people asked me to do the same for Turtledove's Southern Victory series, or as it's known in the online alternate history community, the Timeline 191 series. For those who don't know, Timeline 191 is an epic 11-book alternate history series where the so-called Confederacy gains independence after Union soldiers do not find a copy of Lee's Special Orders 191, hence the name Timeline 191. Lee then goes on to win the Battle of Antietam, a.k.a. the Battle of Sharpsburg, and the Confederacy is later recognized by Britain and France. The book details the conflicts that follow between the two Americas, including the Second Mexican War, the Great War, or World War I as we know it in our timeline, and its sequel, the Second Great War, where a fascist confederacy led by Jake Featherston, a Hitler analog, tries to get their revenge on the North. I was hesitant about speculating on what happens next in Timeline 191, due to the amount of backstory I would need to sift through, along with the fact that many others have already tried to answer the same question, like David Barr Elias's TL 191 After the End on alternathistory.com. But since this is a special occasion, I decided why not guess at the future of Turtledove's book series. So without further ado, this is What Happens Next, Timeline 191. Also, I'm going to spoil the ending of the series, so stop watching now if you plan on reading it. We begin with Germany in 2018, currently ruled by Kaiser George Frederick I. Things were looking great for them at the start of the 1990s. The Frost, which is what their long rivalry with the Democratic Socialists in America was called, finally came to the end when America withdrew their troops from Canada and the former Confederacy in 1991, ending the American Empire. Suddenly, Germany was the most powerful country in the world, and it looked like no one could challenge them. Sure, they were never able to stop other countries from getting super bombs, and the German High Command still loses sleep about whether all of Russia's super bombs are accounted for, but stopping the spread of super bombs was a pipe dream anyway. Then, in 2001, Mormon terrorists flew a plane to the Reichstag building, and suddenly everything changed. Following two costly interventions in Bolivia and Colombia to eradicate Mormon terrorist training camps, the Pax Germanica is starting to look short-lived. Germany still dominates most of Europe, including foreign enemies like Britain and France, thanks to the European Customs Federation, which unites many European economies with Germany. But much of the rest of the world is sensing weakness and have begun to openly challenge Germany for dominance. It doesn't help that the German people are also pining for the good old days when they were conquerors. They also don't like the constant stream of immigrants from Germany's former colonies, which are now self-governing provinces since the reforms in the 1960s, and prefer Germany when the Nine Whites stayed in their own corner of the globe. Add a sluggish economy, and no wonder real estate mogul Ronald Trump's Fatherland Party was able to gain a majority in the Reichstag in 2016. Granted, there has been an ongoing investigation into American interference in the election, but Trumpf dismisses that as bogus stories, and his supporters, proudly wearing their Trumpf-branded pickle helms, loudly shout down any of his opponents. Meanwhile, things in the United States are starting to improve after all the missteps that happened post-Second Great War. In hindsight, the socialists turning America into de facto one-party state after President Thomas Dewey left office was a mistake since it began the frost with Germany and their allies. But to be fair, they did have multiple rebellions in the former Confederacy, an active terrorist movement in Canada, and military interventions in the Western Hemisphere to worry about, and they couldn't let things like free and fair elections get in the way of that. Plus, they couldn't spend money on inconsequential things like infrastructure or food when they had at least try and beat Germany in the space race. But hey, they finally built that canal through Nicaragua, so yeah, that was good, right? They are, however, blamed by everyone for creating the extremist Mormon terrorist movement that is currently plaguing the world by forcibly removing Mormons from their homes in Utah, turning the faith into a popular ideology for revolutionaries, although you'll find few Americans who will take responsibility for that one. Nevertheless, the strain of it all finally did break the American empire, but Rump America is starting to recover under the presidency of former intelligence officer Robert Gates. Although America may have lost Canada and much of the former Confederacy, they still sit on several strategic islands in both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Some of the new independent states, like Cuba and the Republic of the Sandwich Islands, still remain close to Philadelphia, mostly out of fear of what their bigger neighbors would do. Old allies like Quebec can also be relied upon, especially now that Canada is back. Plus, it looks like the United States can work with Germany's new chancellor. Speaking of the CSA, the dream to reintegrate the former Confederacy into the United States never worked out. While the rebellions eventually burned out by the 1970s, the new generation of Southerners never did lose their Dixie spirit. They were, however, horrified at what their parents and grandparents did during the Second Great War. Thus, when the Confederacy did rise again, steps were taken to make sure history did not repeat itself. The Freedom Party and all of its imagery remains banned, and the CSA routinely denounces neo-freedomites operating in South America and South Africa. The Confederate President Doug Jones even traveled to Liberia to formally apologize for what the Confederacy did, and visit monuments dedicated to the lies lost during the population reduction. There are also strong civil rights protections in place for non-whites in the South, including the small African-American minority and the much larger Hispanic population that immigrated to the region after the Second Great War. Much like their neighbor to the north, however, the CSA is a shadow of its former self. Kentucky, Sequoia, Sonora, and Chihuahua stayed with the United States. Louisiana, remembering the time Jake Featherston had Huey Long assassinated, went off on their own. Texas also decided to stay independent and cozy up with America, preferring their nationalist direction over what the wimps in Richmond were doing. Meanwhile, Liberia has appreciated the CSA's gestures, but they're happy the New South is far away from them. Liberia has grown a lot since the Second Great War, being awarded territory from the defeated British and French colonial empires at the end of the Second Great War. They also experienced a huge influx of African-American immigrants who took a shot at new life in Liberia away from the Americans. Admittedly, this led to a lot of native Africans being pushed off their land, leading to a long-lasting insurgency backed by Liberia's neighbors, who occasionally invaded Liberia only to lose more territory to them in the process. No one is exactly sure how to bring peace to West Africa, but Chancellor Drumpf assures the world it's going to be easy now that he is in charge. When not warring with their neighbors, Liberia hunts down the few remaining Freedom Party fugitives. Those bastards are starting to die of old age, and we can't have that. Moving back to Europe, what was once Austria-Hungary is a mess. The Habsburg Empire went through several reforms post-Second Great War to give more autonomy to the ethnic minorities and became the United Kingdom of Greater Austria. Unfortunately, this never sat well with Austrian nationalists, and after bizarre political drama that even a Ukraine writer would call implausible, Austria voted by a slim margin to leave Greater Austria. No one is sure what is going to happen next. Austria supporters hope to remain tied to the rest of Greater Austria through the monarchy, but the rest of the empire has vowed to make that separation as painful as possible. Chancellor Drumpf, on the other hand, doesn't hide his belief that Austria would be better off as part of Germany. The Serbians find the whole mess hilarious. The Ottoman Empire is still together, but barely. Some Ottoman leaders had dreams of becoming the world leader of Islam, but turns out the newly independent Muslim states in North Africa and Central Asia weren't interested in taking orders from the Sultan. Add to that the problems caused by Arab Republicans demanding more concessions from the Sultan and Armenian terrorists exploding their upteenth people bomb, and you don't get a recipe for success. Hey, at least Palestine's quiet. While the sun may be setting over Germany, it is rising over Japan. Ignored mostly during the frost, Japan has become the #1 power in Asia. They have super bombs and a vast empire stretching from Siberia to Indonesia. China is a patchwork of weak states all bowing toward Tokyo, and even Australia is in their sphere of influence now after their American sponsor fell apart. India could become a problem, but their government is struggling to keep the Hindus and Muslims from killing each other, which means they won't be looking outward anytime soon. In hindsight, it was actually a good thing for Japan that Britain didn't partition India after they pulled out. Japan has also reached out to the Empire of Brazil, which is another emerging power that is challenging Germany. Brazil has not enjoyed the influx of German troops in their backyard and hopes better relations with Japan will ensure their withdrawal ASAP. Meanwhile, things in Russia have started to calm down. After losing the 2 Great Wars and the Second Russo-Japanese War, the Socialist Revolutionaries finally kicked the Tsar out. For a brief period, it looked like they might ally with the United States, which stirred panic of a possible superbomb war. But in the end, they stayed neutral. Unfortunately, things just didn't work out, and after a bloody civil war in the 90s, Russia fell apart into several different states, which allegedly turned over all their superbombs to the international community. In the Ukraine genre, Russianization is a term used when someone wants to break a country apart. And that is what I think the present day would look like in Harry Turtledove's Timeline 191 series. I did my best to keep the parallelism found in Turtledove's original work, but I took creative liberties when called for. Granted, I skipped over a lot of countries and regions due to the time constraints, so if you got questions, comments, or if there's another work of alternate history whose future you'd like me to guess at, feel free to share. Well, everyone, thank you for sticking with me for 100 videos. If you still like what I do, please comment, subscribe, share this video, support me on Patreon. I'm Matt Mitrovich, the Alternate Historian. Bye.